Welcome to the Clear to Send podcast, a podcast about wireless engineering, where we educate you on Wi-Fi technology, talk about design tips, troubleshooting, interviews, and the tools. Here are your hosts, Roel and Francois.
Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. I am joined here with my co-host, Francois Vergès. How are you doing, Francois?
Very good. How are you, Roel?
I'm doing very well. I'm happy to be in this meeting because we have some special guests here today to talk about a new announcement that was announced, I think, on September 8th. I think that's right. So we have Google here to talk about Orion Wi-Fi and what that means to us Wi-Fi professionals that may come across this at some point in your career. So we have Raj Gajwani, I think that hopefully that's correct. And we also will have Rich on here. Forgot his last name, but
Rich Mazzola.
Rich Mazzola. So Raj, why don't you introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are?
Wonderful. So first of all, thank you, Roel and Francois. I'm a longtime fan of your podcast. You guys do great work, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Raj Gajwani, and with Richard Mazzola, we are in Google's Area 120 incubator, where we've developed a new technology that we're coming out with called Orion Wi-Fi. We're pretty excited about it because for high-quality Wi-Fi operators, this gives you a way to do what's called carrier offload, or Wi-Fi offload for cellular carriers. So you can earn money from your Wi-Fi network while improving the visitor experience when people are coming to your property.
Interesting. So it's I guess a similar model that we've probably seen from other carriers or other public venues. What would be the benefit of, I guess, using Orion Wi-Fi? It's new. You're offloading carrier data to the Wi-Fi network. For someone like me, like, why would I care about that? You did mention that you could make some money off that. I guess that would perk a lot of people's ears, and we got their attention from that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. It's not just making money, but that's a part of it. So let me step back a little bit and explain a couple of things that are part of how we came here. First of all, we're all hyper-connected people. We walk around with supercomputers in our pocket, and we expect that they'll work everywhere. And then if I run a mall or a hospital or an office building and guests come to my property and they can't be connected, we have a problem, right? It's a problem for the guests, but it's also a problem for me. And we try and solve that problem in a variety of ways. You can give captive portals. You can have a free, open, unsecured network. Every way has its own issues with it. Carriers, this is a big problem for them too. So when I walk in the property and I'm an AT&T subscriber and I'm like, man, I can't get a connection or the network is too slow, that's a problem for AT&T. The carriers have solved this problem a little bit with large Wi-Fi vendors like Boingo, right? Boingo, of course, is the gold standard for carrier-grade Wi-Fi. So I'm an AT&T subscriber. When I walk into an airport, it's pretty likely AT&T puts me on Boingo's Wi-Fi network. I didn't do anything, but all of a sudden, I'm on a faster, higher quality local connection. AT&T reduces load on its network. Boingo gets paid for building that, and I'm just happier, right? In fact, AT&T helped invent the protocols to do this. You guys might remember about 10 years ago when their network was under huge strain because of the iPhone. I remember there were a couple of years I couldn't get a call through in New York City when I was on AT&T. And so they said, we need to have the ability to do Wi-Fi offload. We need to be able to use that network. So this is an established, more than a decade-old technology. But it turns out Boingo can do it for an airport, but you can't do it for a strip mall, and you can't do it for a hospital, and you can't do it for an office, because it's been pretty manual and pretty painful to do. To go and say, hey, AT&T, let me give you access to my Wi-Fi network, that is often a 2-year process with lawyers and accountants and business development people and a whole bunch of other work. We and the whole industry really think that this should be a lot easier. And so we have built essentially a self-service automated model for you to kind of say, hey, my Wi-Fi network is available for carriers to use. And so turning on Orion Wi-Fi in your network is kind of like putting a PayPal button on your network that only carriers can use. Or another analogy, it's kind of like listing your apartment on Airbnb and saying, my network is available for carrier use. And here are my terms, right? Here's the price that I want, and here's some information about the quality and where my network is located. On the other end, the carrier has controls. So the carrier can say, I'm looking for to serve my subscribers. And so if I know a little bit about your network, I can choose yes to use your network or no not to use your network and have a lot of control, quality measurement and control over that. So we're trying to build something that helps solve that problem for carriers and solve the problem for you. That's the high-level theory. I'll get into a little bit about how it works and what it means for the Wi-Fi network operator as well. But does that make sense or answer your question, Roel?
Yeah, I think it's a good description. I do like the analogy. It's like putting your Wi-Fi network out there as an Airbnb to carriers and saying, hey, come offload to my Wi-Fi network. I'm a public venue, a big mall, for example, or maybe a stadium. And I guess the question for me is, does this eliminate the having to put a DAS in place?
I think it's a complement to a DAS. So a distributed antenna system is clearly the gold standard, right? A distributed antenna system is kind of saying, I'm going to put a finger of the carrier's network on my property, but that's going to cost $250,000 and take a couple of years of work. And frankly, it can be quite painful. I talked to a woman a few weeks ago who said, I did a DAS once. It took 18 months, and it was the, quote, worst professional experience of my entire career.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think that's necessarily the technology. Part of it is the amount of like legal work you go through and such. So doing a DAS is like saying I'm going to build a hotel from scratch. If I already have a good Wi-Fi network, it's often good enough for some carrier use cases, and I don't have to spend anything. So with Orion Wi-Fi, again, to use that analogy, instead of building a hotel from scratch, I just want to list my spare bedroom on Airbnb. The goal is that in your Wi-Fi network, if you have an enterprise or commercial Wi-Fi network, it should take you less than half a day. In fact, on some systems, it can take less than 10 or 15 minutes to turn this on. Cisco is building an easy button for Orion Wi-Fi into their DNA Spaces product. Juniper Mist has built-in support for this into their networks. In both cases, it'll take less than 30 minutes. Ruckus has support for this in their controllers. They have the new Virtual Smart Zone 6.0, I believe, has built-in RadSec, which makes it pretty quick and easy, so like half an hour of work. If you don't have one of those newer controllers, it should take less than half a day. But there's no cost. There's no additional software or hardware to purchase. You don't need to change or remove anything else you have on your network. All of your existing access mechanisms work. So it's a pretty lightweight lift for you as the network owner. On the carrier side, sure, if you've spent the $250,000 in the DAS, they should use that. But if they're subscribers at your property and you don't have a DAS, this can help fill in that need for them in many cases.
So on the carrier end of things, if you're about to put some money into one of the providers, how do you make sure that they provide good enough Wi-Fi? Because you don't want to end up in the situation where AT&T sucks. I'm going to switch over to another one, right?
It's a great question, and it's something we've worked on a lot. In fact, the whole industry is working on this. I recently joined the board of the Wireless Broadband Alliance, which is working on standards for OpenRoaming. And those standards are designed to improve the interface between the Wi-Fi network and the carrier, specifically on this point. How do I ensure quality and measure it? And we've done a lot of similar things on our end. So part of the reason that a DAS or Wi-Fi offload has been painful is that in the past, it was like a really heavyweight agreement. If a carrier says, I'm using your Wi-Fi network, they're saying all of their subscribers will connect to all of your APs always. That's a scary thing for them, right? And so they basically have to do a ton of work in advance to validate the quality of your network, to go and I think do a little bit, something like a proctology exam to investigate what you've got set up, and then to have strict SLAs and obligations in the contract. We tried to flip that model around. This is a no obligation and no commitment model on both sides. So you can turn this on at 2 p.m. in the afternoon and turn it off at 4 p.m. You can turn it on and say, I only want it for 3 of my networks and not for the others. And you don't have to commit for the long term. Similarly, the carrier is not promising you anything. If you turn on Orion Wi-Fi and your network kind of sucks, you may not have any carriers buy it. Like if I list my Pez dispenser on eBay, there's no guarantee someone's going to buy it. What we've done is try and put a lot of intelligence into our system so we can tell whether your network is meeting carrier grade needs. So there's going to be some carriers and some plans where they say we only want the very highest quality, and if you can assure like Boingo level reliability, you'll have plenty of demand. And there'll be other carriers, like maybe it's a data only plan on a tablet, who say, for this plan, I'm okay with lower quality because it's just using, for email or something. And so if we have a lower quality network, that might be perfectly fine for that carrier. So there's no guarantees, but the higher quality your network and the more we can verify the quality of your network, the more demand we can get for you.
And how do you do that from a technical standpoint? Is that like the secret sauce, or can you talk about that?
So it's a great question. We're actually trying to avoid secret sauce because everything we're doing, we intend it to end up in the standards bodies. We want this all to be open. In fact, we think that this is we think this is kind of the like almost a pre-standard implementation of the OpenRoaming settled standards that the WBA is working on. And so there's a bunch of different ways you can measure quality. One is that when you sign up, you tell us the quality of your network. Two is that we have measurements from your controller. And one of the your Wi-Fi controller, one of the things that OpenRoaming standards are doing is establishing a standard for how the controller communicates back to the carrier to say, this is my quality level now, and this is my quality level in the past. The WBA is working on a database of historical quality measures. We also have some proprietary tools we can use to go and measure end-to-end quality. What's the experience that devices have when they're in your network? So we are trying to leverage a whole bunch of different approaches to address the quality question, and a bunch of those will, I think, improve as the standards bodies get involved.
That's interesting. Could you use like applications, like Android applications, to be part of the process to to get some data? Like I'm thinking about the speed, the speed test application that's like widely used everywhere, and you can get data. They're pretty much a data company, right? So I'm thinking maybe.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
That's a great point, and I wanted to talk about that because data usage is a hot topic. We've spent a lot of time with lawyers, and Google has to be very, very careful about data. So Android is not going to do anything. Android is basically behind a Chinese wall, and so Android data is protected by all of Android's privacy policies. It's possible that our team could build an Android app and give it to you as a network administrator to run. We might also, use iPerf and things like that. And the bigger thing is that we've tried to be very careful that there's no PII, there's no data from end users transferred between the parties. So when the carrier is subscribers on your property, you don't learn anything about who that person is. And similarly, your controller is not telling any of your PII to the carrier. Even the MAC address doesn't leave your network, right? So we're trying to keep it all very proprietary. As a result, when we do quality measurement, we're super careful about data propriety. We're not actually trying to like sniff or snoop on end user traffic, but rather using other channels and other tools which don't impinge on user privacy at all.
Find some sort of metrics and that, or algorithm you can apply to a whole bunch of inputs and get like a final score that you can then communicate to the carriers.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah, that's true. And one other thing to mention, Francois, is that we just launched, and we think that there's a long road. Over the next 5 or 10 years, I think this becomes a core part of how telecom works. And we have a long wish list of things that'll get better. So for instance, the controller should tell those aggregate metrics to us in a really good way. That's not really there yet. Some of the protocols we're using should give us better metrics. That's not really there yet. So within the bounds of privacy and capabilities, we've got a lot of techniques in place right now. But I think you're going to see a lot of improvement as this idea becomes more widespread.
Okay. And one thing that that comes across my mind is why did Google decide to get into this space? Like, why
Mm-hmm.
do Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi offload? It almost seems like there's nothing that you guys gain from doing it, because you said it was a very low
Well,
barrier to entry for the network operator. It doesn't cost them
yeah,
anything to use this service. Um, so I guess someone might say, what's the catch then?
sure. Well, Google, there's two or three things there. It's a great question. First of all, Google does a lot in networking, and so the most obvious one is that a large fraction of the world's devices run on Android, and the Android team cares about having those devices connected more often. So better access to networks is a core mission for Android. Another one is that Google operates a cellular carrier. Google Fi is our own virtual carrier, MVNO carrier. And so actually Google Fi is the first carrier user of this platform as well. Two carriers are using this at launch, which is Google Fi and Republic Wireless, another very innovative MVNO. So Republic Wireless and Google Fi both are saying we want our subs to have access to not just all the cellular networks we can get, but also the Wi-Fi networks we can get. And we'll try and provide more options for our customers. So at a high level theory perspective, Google has a lot of interest in making networks more accessible. And in a very practical perspective, we want Google Fi subscribers to have the best connectivity possible. So Google Fi is using this.
And so you guys, I mean, Google Fi is one of the carrier that uses the platform, but you guys also kind of operate as the middleman between the carriers and, and the Wi-Fi network operators. So is it, are you guys working with different countries? Because that's the question you could ask after that. Like Google Fi is only available in certain region in the world. But are you guys looking at, creating partnership with, carriers, that partner with WBA, for instance, or any partners, any carriers in the world that could, come in and pitch in and purchase those services, I guess?
Yeah, so great question. I know you guys have a global audience. Orion Wi-Fi is only available in the United States right now. And that's unfortunately largely because of legal reasons. It turns out that from a regulatory perspective, we need to redo the contract separately for each country. Okay. I expect and hope that we will roll out to other countries in the future, but right now this is available in the United States.
Okay, so I'm guessing the work that you guys do with the WBA hopefully will help you guys in trying to, ease those relationships. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And you know what? Sorry, go ahead, Francois.
I was going to say we actually did Roel and I did an episode with Thiago, the CEO of the WBA, and he was mentioning the thousands of contracts that different operators have to do with the carriers. So now I'm guessing only you guys will have to take off these contracts, and then it will be easier for the network operators to to offload.
Yeah, and to be honest, we expect that people will use this technology not just through Orion Wi-Fi. WBA is going to standardize this into OpenRoaming, and so lots of carriers have their existing Wi-Fi service providers, and those folks will be able to use it. By analogy, I kind of think that we're building like Gmail or Outlook so that our system works with any other email system. We're not building Lotus Notes. We're not building a closed system, so it's not like Orion Wi-Fi only works with Orion Wi-Fi. The whole point is that carriers in a different country might have their own implementation, and it will interoperate smoothly with us and vice versa.
Okay.
And Raj, I think your audio, I don't know if anyone else can hear it, but your audio seems a bit choppy. I hear like little choppy noises, but
I'm going to turn off my video and we'll see if that helps. I apologize.
No, we could introduce Rich, who just joined us. Rich, how are you doing?
Hey, everyone. Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks for having us on today. Sorry for joining in halfway through.
No, it's okay. Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone and let them know what you do at Orion?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Rich Mazzola, and I lead business development for Orion. So essentially what that means is I'm out talking to all the network owners across the industry. So from commercial real estate to managed service providers to large venues that you kind of recognize walking around the world, and also partnering with Raj on a lot of the different MVNO and carrier relationships that he was talking about as well.
Okay. And since you talk to these customers, what is their biggest challenge when it comes to providing Wi-Fi in their venue, and how do you position Orion Wi-Fi to be kind of that solution for them as people go from LTE or 5G to Wi-Fi as it's being offloaded?
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of the customers we already talked to have made a strategic decision to give Wi-Fi away as an amenity. So that's the case in commercial real estate. A lot of retail, that's also the case. So if you think large malls or retail shopping centers, whether indoor or outdoor. So in most cases, the wireless infrastructure already exists. And the challenges that we hear from a lot of our customers are that to provide in-building connectivity, the alternatives tend to be really expensive. So they typically include things that come with a capital investment, so more CapEx. And they also come with, as Raj touched on, a lot of legal complexity. So the number one thing I hear from customers is that the costs in legal to do any of these deals to solve in-building connectivity are somewhere from $250,000 to $1 million if it takes like 18 to 24 months. And a lot of the reason that we think Wi-Fi offload hasn't been available to a lot of these, especially if you think of like a small business, if I own a small, mixed-use retail center, the thought of spending $1 million or $250,000 in legal costs to get, $70,000, $80,000 in offload just doesn't make sense. So from that perspective, one of the biggest challenges is just the operationally and legally, how do I make this connection happen? So that's one of the big things I think we've been able to solve with Orion Wi-Fi is to standardize that. So Raj talked about Gmail. One of the big innovations here is having standardized Wi-Fi offload agreements that are click to accept, that a small business owner can have confidence in that they're getting the same contract as everyone else. So I think that's one piece of it. The second piece is that since there's no cost for the building owner, this becomes a free guest amenity. So the fact that a patron, guest, visitor can walk into the building, walk into the retail center, take out their phone and have seamless connectivity, essentially what we think of with OpenRoaming, at no additional CapEx cost to them, is kind of a big deal. So at the end of the day, what we've been able to position to the network owner is that you have a low cost, frictionless access to Wi-Fi offload and a new guest amenity that wasn't there in the past. And I think the combination of those two things has been really nice for them and kind of a breath of fresh air that there's no investment needed for this.
Yeah, it sounds like a no-brainer almost, right?
Yeah.
I had a question for you. Did you guys do any testing, like field test? And if you did, what type of devices did you use to do your testing and try to test the transition between LTE, Wi-Fi, and back and forth?
Yeah, so I will say that pre-COVID testing was a lot easier. We joke all of our homes now look like Best Buy outlet stores because we have APs hanging around. I don't know if I could, I have the Meraki APs and APs under my desk and all different devices hanging around, and we're always constantly trying to walk in and out of our houses to see what happens. So device matrix testing in a COVID world is not a simple thing. But yeah, a lot of early on what we were doing was trying to make sure that this zero touch experience was enabled. And one of the principles we had was that for Orion Wi-Fi to work really well, that meant that consumers had to have a zero touch experience, which meant they went from LTE to in-building, and the authentication was fast and seamless and didn't take a lot of drain on the device. So that took a lot of matrix testing across basically every device you could think of from a handset perspective, and all the major wireless networking OEMs to see how different APs kind of played. And the WBA was really helpful in that, because basically everyone you would think from a testing standpoint participates in the WBA, and the testing matrices that they had for OpenRoaming were hugely helpful.
And then from a client device perspective, you guys tested, I'm guessing, iOS devices, Android devices. Did it work right away? Did you guys have to install any specific updates? Did you find any hardware limitations on the client side of things?
Yeah, one of the values in using Passpoint is that it's really light So just getting the profile with the certificate onto the device is pretty straightforward. One of the things we found is that, like anything else with certain operating systems and certain configurations, you run into problems. So there's edge cases where pass point's off by default, or certain configurations where on reboot the profile disappears and reappears. So there's always, any time with a lot of hardware fluctuations and permutations, there's these edge cases that we kind of had to work through and continue to work through.
Awesome.
If I can jump in on that, though, one of the advantages of being completely standards-based is that these standards have existed in both iOS and Android for several years. Mm-hmm. And iOS and Android are working hard to make their support of the standard better. So this, I think, is already pretty good. The odds that your device supports Passpoint and supports Orion Wi-Fi are really, really high. And the standard support is getting better and the standards are getting better. So we expect that to continue to improve.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about Passpoint, both of you, because that is the underlying technology here as it's being implemented with OpenRoaming. And so that's what you mean by having it standards based, is you are leveraging something that's already been well defined and that's been used everywhere. Mm-hmm. But I guess you guys are bringing a little bit more, you're bringing a different, a different way of implementing it with Orion Wi-Fi, where I, as a network operator, can implement this pretty easily. So when it comes to the implementation part, you mentioned a couple of controllers. So obviously the consumer grade equipment is not going to be a viable solution here. So for those who have maybe a coffee shop that has just a Netgear wireless router, that won't be supported. You would have to maybe at least step to a Meraki AP. Do you guys have support for something like Ubiquiti Unify systems as well?
Yeah, and the neat thing is you could just go, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, you can go check it out at orion.area120.com, and we can send you deployment guides for all of your equipment. So Cisco and Meraki are supported, CommScope's Ruckus is supported, Juniper Mist is supported, Aruba is supported, Fortinet is supported, Ubiquiti is supported. We're busy rolling out deployment guides as fast as we can for lots of these. But basically, something like 80% of the market for enterprise and commercial Wi-Fi supports this, and that number is only going to go up. So if you have an enterprise or commercial Wi-Fi network, pretty good odds that your network will work with this. And you can just go to orion.area120.com or search for Orion Wi-Fi, and you'll find our site where you can sign up and even go all the way through and turn this on with standardized deployment guides and some pretty easy setup.
And I've seen the documentations and deployment guides are really nice. That you guys organize it per vendor, so I can click on the vendor I have, and then it details. It's like a step-by-step process of different things I need to you. You have screenshots. So it looks like a pretty straightforward thing to. I'm definitely going to test it on my stuff at home. I'm in Canada, so I don't know what to expect. I'm guessing it's just gonna not do anything. I don't know. I don't know. We'll see, I guess.
It should be pretty easy. So if you're a Google Fi subscriber, as this rolls out to your phone, you would see it auto connect. But if otherwise, when you turn it on, it is kind of invisible to you and invisible to the consumer. What happens is that you just start getting paid, and your visitors get better connections sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm guessing I'll be able to see the pass point in the frames if I do some packet captures on the beacons and stuff like that. So at least I'll get that right to confirm. But it's just exactly, and I just want to go through the process to see how easy it is, because it's been a struggle, right, to set up not only the legal side of things but also the technical side of things, like how do I manage that authentication back to the carrier and all of these questions that sometimes goes over our head, especially if you're an IT admin and you have to take care of the Wi-Fi, but also the networking and the servers, and these stuff are kind of advanced. So the fact that it's made easy for us, I think it's a big plus for the engineer.
If you'd like to walk through, I'm happy to do that. Rich, particularly knows a lot about this as well. It's, I think, like a 3-step process, actually.
Yeah, and one of the things I would say there is in definitely kind of having some empathy for the network managers and IT managers. I think a lot of times we say like, oh, well, it's just a 15-step deployment guide with screenshots. It's really straightforward. And one of the things that we've learned is that in the context of what they're doing in their day-to-day life with managing these networks, it really has to be simple for them to enable it. So part of what we've tried to do is think about it in the context of, okay, you have an hour free before your next meeting. Can you get Orion deployed in that time? And that's kind of our measurement for success.
So what are the steps then? What's the underlying steps there to make this all work? We talk about how easy it is, but we do have a lot of technical people who listen to the show. So if they've never configured Passpoint or don't understand how under the hood how it works, what are the components here?
Yeah, Raj, do you want me to take that, or do you want to take that?
Why don't you go ahead? You know it better than anyone.
Yeah, so there's two broad components for the technical configuration. The first is what you mentioned with the Passpoint profile. So essentially what this is on your wireless controller, there's a series of in most wireless controllers, it's all UI. None of this is command line. So essentially what you're doing is putting in different Passpoint profile settings that will specify which RCOI, so which roaming identifier, will be broadcast. And on the device side, the devices have a Passpoint profile with a certificate that's also looking for that RCOI that's being broadcast. So that's kind of the first step that exists, is making sure that the Passpoint settings within the wireless controller are configured properly so the devices can find the networks that are participating. The second that's required is RADSEC. So essentially what RADSEC does is it encrypts the authentication traffic from the wireless controller to the Orion software so that we can make those access or reject authentication decisions when we see the phone come in range. So RADSEC can either be implemented in one of two ways. One, if RADSEC is native to the wireless controller you're using, that means that it's kind of like Passpoint where you just type in the IP endpoints and you're kind of good to go because it's just going to point directly to our endpoint. If your wireless controller does not support RADSEC natively, then it essentially involves setting up like a Docker or a separate VPN, just so that the authentication traffic is encrypted from the wireless controller to the Orion system. So those are the two main pieces to set up.
So the Docker instance would be your RADSEC proxy that then
exactly.
So if you've got a controller where you cannot set up or type in the endpoint to the Orion, I guess it's the Orion Wi-Fi endpoint.
Yep.
You would have to set up something like a RADSEC proxy in order to send that traffic back to Orion, or encrypt the authentication back to Orion.
Exactly. Yeah. So in that deployment documentation, you'll see the RADSEC proxy config. So that's why we say it can take anywhere from 10 minutes to a couple of hours. The 10-minute side is if RADSEC is native, then you're just typing in the IP endpoint, and it's kind of the same as setting up the Passpoint profile where you're just going line by line for the configuration settings. If you're setting up RADSEC proxy, then that can take an hour or a couple of hours to get that instance set up, and kind of depending if you're familiar with the Docker deployment.
Okay, and so once you set that up, and of course, like some of these vendors have it natively. We've talked a lot about Mist lately, so they do have that natively into their dashboard. Whereas others, you just have to build that Docker instance. So you do have to have either a server infrastructure to have that, because that piece would be important for the authentication. So you might need more than one, maybe 2 instances. So that way, if one failed or something happened to it, you have another authentication method out to Orion. Or I guess you could leverage somebody else to be your proxy, where they just host the proxy services for you.
Yeah, if you have a hosted controller, like you have a vendor who's running a controller for you, they can do this for you for sure.
Okay.
And you talked about who has it built in. Juniper Mist has a really nice implementation of it. Cisco is building into DNA Spaces an implementation. Ruckus and Virtual Smart Zone 6 has this built in. So the vendors are rapidly adding support for RadSec built in. So that makes it easier, and either you or your vendor or a third party can help run it.
Okay. And so once you set this up, how do you know if it's working rather than testing that on maybe some users who might walk into your venue? Like, how do you know that it's up and running properly?
Yeah, there's one really awesome feature that we actually just launched, I think earlier this week or last week in our portal, where we basically have a stoplight of red, yellow, green. So if we are detecting a persistent RadSec connection from either your RadSec proxy or your wireless controller directly to our service, then we'll report that status back to you in real time in your portal. So you'll be able to know if the RadSec proxy is persistent and is up. And then so I think, was that the question on RadSec or more generally on the authentication?
It was more so on the RadSec part, like that your configuration did make it can connect to Orion Wi-Fi and pass the authentication properly.
Yeah. So we pass that back in real time now into the sign up portal.
How about for troubleshooting in general? Let's say I am a network operator. I've implemented Orion Wi-Fi, but I have someone that says, "Hey, I can't even connect to the SSID you set up, and it's configured for Orion RadSec and Orion Wi-Fi connectivity." How does one troubleshoot an issue? Because in the beginning, Raj said there's no personal identifying information being passed to me as an operator. So how would I ensure that the service is good for the end user?
Yeah. So I can take the first part of this, where that kind of traffic light system that I talked about is doing a couple things. So the first step is saying, is there a persistent RadSec connection? And that's kind of like the P0 to make sure that the system is set up properly. And then the second is saying, is there a persistent RadSec connection and active connections? And basically what we're looking for is to see, are there successful authentications? So that gives the network owner kind of the green light to say, yes, persistent RadSec connection, and there's active authentications occurring at some rate. And then I think the question is, if you're stuck in that yellow kind of active RadSec, no connections, what can you do? And I think right now what we're doing is with our support team, basically we allow the network owners to reach out where we can kind of look on the back end to make sure everything's working properly. But I think that's part of what we're trying to rapidly iterate and push out to the portal is make it more and more self-service as we develop those features.
Okay.
Yeah, and as Rich mentioned, we've got some things built in on the back end so we can help with troubleshooting, but this is a really common request, and I think it's an important one. So over the coming months, you're going to see improved capabilities to give you visibility into what's the quality of your network, how often are end users connecting. I'd like it to be pretty clear to you, for instance, that carriers said yes or no to using your network, and here's why. So if it's important to you, you can go and meet those requirements from the carriers. We launched on September 8th, and this is a new technology. It's exciting, but it's also early. So we're going to continue to have lots of improvement as these kinds of feature requests come in.
Yeah, I think it would be important too, as part of your deployment guide, having a set of criteria that needs to be met by the network operator to ensure that that experience would be the same. Because things that come to my mind are people who don't do designs, they don't do validation to ensure like the Wi-Fi network is operating the way it should be, or they put certain restrictions in place where you join Wi-Fi, but your experience isn't good because it's slow or they've blocked certain things. I'm sure that's not what these carriers want.
Well, that's one reason we're excited to work with experts. So there's a lot of network experts, network engineers, and then managed service providers who know this really well. And we've found that some of the greatest interest in Orion Wi-Fi comes from the network engineers and the managed service providers. because in a sense, Orion Wi-Fi is one more feature or capability you can offer to your customers. The customer who employs high quality network engineers or a managed service provider is getting a high quality network. The carriers will value that and pay more for that. And you can offer that as a feature to your customers. So if you are running networks for customers, and if you are running a managed service provider or managed services, we'd love to talk with you. We'd love to work with you to help offer this to your customers.
Awesome. And in the beginning, we did mention how the network operator can make revenue from this, but we didn't even talk about how that part worked. How does it work?
Yeah. So the short of it is that we expect a range of different prices, and this is kind of early days in terms of how it's being set up. But the guidance is that there are some venues who say, look, I don't have the ability to have a DAS, but I just want carriers to connect to my network. I don't care about the money, so I'll set it free. And we'll also interoperate with OpenRoaming networks, which are essentially doing the same thing. But for networks that have high quality and say, I have a private network I want to sell to the carriers, of which there are many, the average price we believe will be around 20 cents per gigabyte as a market rate based on usage. And then the amount of money you would make would be a combination of foot traffic, right? Do I have 10 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people coming through my property per day? How long do they stay and how much data do they use? And does their carrier participate? So in full transparency, this is just getting started. Today, there's a few smaller carriers using it. It's not going to be like a gusher of money, but it is going to be extra dollars down to the bottom line. And there'll be some visitors who can use it. Over time, especially as the industry standards firm up, we expect a lot of carriers to use this and the revenue volumes will go up.
Yeah, I see it as an alternative method to monetizing Wi-Fi, where what we think about with monetizing Wi-Fi is placing a price to use Wi-Fi, right? You got a tiered pricing, free or basic connectivity, pay more for faster connectivity, or they try to get something out of you, right? Like your email address or something. You sign up for a portal, and then they have you on your list. This is much more seamless for end users because we all just want connectivity when we get to these venues, right? I don't want to be sold to when I connect to Wi-Fi. So this could be a way where the network operator just works with the carrier, and that's where the transaction's done, and that's where they can make money from their Wi-Fi system.
And the neat thing, Royal, is that it's not either or. If I have a paid captive portal and I have a marketing monetization and I have something else, I don't have to change those. I can leave those all on and continue to use them as normal. But if a visitor comes in and their carrier is willing to pay, I can say, I'll take that too. It's one more option for monetization. It doesn't remove any of the other existing mechanisms you have.
Okay, so a network operator would still be able to put a like a captive portal, but still tie in Passpoint and use Orion Wi-Fi in order to still provide that authentication.
Yeah, it's just sort of adding one extra option, right? Like if I take PayPal and Visa, I can add MasterCard on top of that without removing the other two. It's just kind of like that.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the things we hear a lot from venues is that the captive portal is super critical for things like loyalty programs and guest experience, but at the end of the day, it may be that only 20 or 25% of visitors are tapping on the SSID and successfully logging in. So the question is, what do I do for the other 70-75% of people that aren't doing that? We think Orion can just help increase that attach rate with pretty low effort.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you're using Passpoint on the back end, they would just seamlessly connect to it and start using the Wi-Fi.
Yep,
All
right.
right.
I have a technical question, and it's related to people traveling. So let's say I come from Canada, have a cell phone with like a carrier here in Canada. I go to the US, and then my carrier has a roaming agreement with a carrier in the US, and that carrier in the US is part of the Orion program for one venue. if I go inside this venue with my phone, do you think Passpoint would work in that in that regards? I know it's a very
Very specific.
very
It's a great
specific question, but I mean, my question is essentially those carrier roamings agreements, would that carry over to Passpoint?
No, not right now.
Okay.
Basically, the carrier roaming agreements are about LTE, and so
Okay.
it's about what the LTE towers are broadcasting and what LTE network your device connects to. Passpoint operates on the device as a way of selecting Wi-Fi networks, and so your home carrier would have to install the Passpoint profile on the device. If they do that, it might connect to a different Wi-Fi network. But your home carrier's relationship with a foreign carrier will only affect the LTE behavior of the device.
Okay. Okay. So that makes sense. Okay. So, but in the future, I could have, like, if I go to my carrier, my account page, I could have a link to download a profile
Yes.
to like one of the partners in different countries to install those profiles on my phone. So when I go abroad, it will work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and honestly, we expect the carriers to do that without making you do anything. Like
Oh,
when
okay.
you're going abroad, you don't have to say, "I'd like to roam onto these LTE networks." Similarly, you shouldn't have to select to roam onto these Wi-Fi networks. It's early days, so we're not servicing outside the U.S. right now. But what you described is something that I expect will happen.
Mm-hmm. That would be great. Because usually when you travel, that's when you want access to the Wi-Fi, right? You don't want to stay on the cell connection.
And for cost reasons, when I travel, my carrier is putting me on a cellular network, but usually not with the highest priority or the highest speeds. Sometimes I might get good coverage everywhere, but it's super slow. So having Wi-Fi as a supplement is really really exciting when I'm traveling.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. I know you guys have to head out pretty soon, but I want to thank you both, Raj and Rich, for joining us to talk about Orion Wi-Fi. I think it's a great addition to what you guys are doing with OpenRoaming and how you can bring a more seamless experience for users, right? I think that's what we're looking for. That's specifically what I'm looking for, where I don't have to constantly turn off cellular to get into Wi-Fi, turn off Wi-Fi because cellular is better. So I can see this being improved, especially when you have conditions set up where the device might make a decision. Wi-Fi is not performing very well, so we should pick the cellular connection and vice versa. That's what I would like to see. But this is again like a good start, right? Talking about roaming between carriers and public venues, because there usually wasn't that agreement. Why don't you remind everyone where to go to find more information on Orion Wi-Fi?
Great. So you can search for Orion Wi-Fi, or you can visit orion.area120.com. Area 120 again is the internal startup incubator inside Google, and this is a project coming out of there. So orion.area120.com. It's you don't have to talk to us. It's a self-service process to create an account, to download the configurations, and to get started. So feel free to play with it, check it out, and we're available with lots of great technical support and business support if you have questions.
Cool. Well, we appreciate it. Thank you again for joining us on the show to talk about Orion Wi-Fi. If you guys have any questions, head over to cleartosend.net/239. I think that's what this episode will be. And fill out the comments down below if you have any questions. We can pass them through. We can extend this discussion further, because this is something I would definitely like to see and test out myself with OpenRoaming, since we've had discussions about OpenRoaming in previous episodes. So we'll also link to those episodes as well, so you can get more familiar with OpenRoaming and understand how it differs from other technologies, right? So this is another thing we could add to our tool belt and provide solutions to people who just want easy, seamless connectivity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Roland and Francois.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Appreciate it.